Hello. Thank you guys so much for coming to this podcast today. I am tuning in with Charles Hoskinson from warm, sunny Colorado. We're at Rare Bloom. How are you doing today, Charles?
Always warm, always sunny.
I'm happy to be here with you. This has been a long time coming. We've done a few podcasts before, but there's nothing better than doing one in person. I think the flow is going to be a lot better. How are you enjoying Rare Bloom so far?
It's actually a great event. It's a little different than CNFT-Con. So CNFT-Con is a big Las Vegas convention center, massive, voluminous halls, tons of people. This is at Gaylord Hotel here nearby DIA. It's much more intimate, kind of a different crowd, a little bit of an overlap. So a different vibe, but no less important. I'm really enjoying it. We've had some great conversations. The exhibition area is a lot of fun. We also had a chance to kind of roll out and demo Lace and introduce it to the community here. So we've really appreciated it. I had a great keynote this morning, and then just got off of a interview with Big Pey, which is always fun and exciting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I heard it was a little spicy. I'm looking forward to watching that. I was too busy writing the script for this one. So just to jump right into Lace, you guys said that you release Lace, and what is Lace, and what utility does that provide for Cardano users?
So I thought a lot about how do we get Cardano to 1 billion users? How do we get the ecosystem to become the world financial operating system? And instead of that is just good old-fashioned hardcore protocol design, where you do the science, you do the engineering, you build great protocols, and you get those protocols into market. Other parts of that is, well, what is the consumer interface? What is the portal upon which 1 billion people will do stuff? Whether they're playing with NFTs, they're issuing assets, they're doing DeFi things, they're playing video games. There's identity components, estate planning components, managing billions of dollars, security tokens, all this type of stuff. So about last year, we said, let's start a research project to imagine what a portal, an interface to all of those use cases would look like, to go above and beyond what a normal cryptocurrency wallet does. So an identity-first wallet with full node security, but it's light enough to be on a phone. And it was a very ambitious project. We put some of our best people together. We took a lot of great new technologies like Mithril and Atala Prism, and a lot of legacy stuff that we invented in the Cardano ecosystem, and we pulled it all together. And now Lace as a product is starting to come out into market. It's one of our first commercial B2C products, and so it's not a reference client. It's not like Daedalus, which is a neutral playground, but rather this is IO's view of how crypto ought to be done. And our hope is that it's going to kind of push along the standards for our entire ecosystem, get every wallet to become Mithril enabled, have people start really getting identity seriously, talk about certified wallet standards and these types of things. It's a browser-based interface. It'll eventually come to your cell phone and to the desktop. And every step of the way, it's innovating as much as it can. So we're real excited to kind of demo it, build a beta movement around it with some pioneers. And hopefully we'll be able to translate that into a very successful ecosystem that can bring in everybody, not just the crypto enthusiasts, but the entire space. It's also going to be cross-chain. So it's not just Cardano. It'll support Bitcoin, Ethereum, and a lot of other ecosystems, and showcase what we've created as an ecosystem to the rest of the cryptocurrency space in that respect.
That's amazing. Can we go a little bit into Mithril? What is Mithril?
So Mithril is kind of solving a very specific set of problems where you want to verify something as if you had the entire blockchain, but you don't have it. Mm-hmm. So it's just that simple. So normally how you do that is that you would have like a really heavy snark or some really sophisticated cryptography. But because we designed Cardano the right way and we had a lot of foresight, we were able to come up with something that's much lighter weight than what Mina is doing or Cello's doing. So we don't need Plumo, we don't need super sophisticated snarks. We were able to, with just threshold cryptography, to create these beautiful certificates that stake pool operators can construct, and their existence allows people to verify state and transactions as if they had a full node, while they could be doing that on a light client. This is absolutely essential for scalability. It's absolutely essential also for usability, because at the end of the rainbow, the vast majority of people are going to be using their cell phones, laptops, browser clients, these types of things. They use crypto. And if they don't have the ability to do this, they have to trust a third party. So effectively, you've centralized something that should be decentralized. So we worked on it for about 24 weeks with a great partner, Gawa, and now we've gotten to a point where we're opening up, and stake pool operators are the ones who are starting to install and play around with it, because they're the ones who will be building the Mithril certificates as value-added software on top of their stake pools. And then hopefully it'll become an open standard that wallets can integrate. light wallet side for security, and full node side for parallel validation of epochs. So you have much faster bootstrap for full nodes.
So considering Lace will accept multiple different cryptocurrencies in the wallet, will Mithril work with, Bitcoin or, other applications, or has Cardano been built, from the start to allow Mithril to work?
Well, our shit is always the best stuff. And so, while I can do some stuff for other ecosystems, I can't do it all. So with proof of work ecosystems, we have a concept called NEPA-PALs, non-interactive proofs of proof of work, that DNS's Zindros invented while working with us. And it's been turned into concepts like Fly Client. And there's even ideas about how to get it into Bitcoin without a hard fork. It's called a Velvet fork. So certainly some people are exploring that technology. There's also proofs of proof of stake that DNS's came up with that Ethereum could potentially use. So as we go multi-coin, the idea of embedding proofs and proof structures into the wallet to maintain a consistent trust model is very important. But you innovate where you innovate, and so Mithril is really built hand in glove for Cardano and its sidechain ecosystem. It was never built to port over to these other ecosystems. But good news is there's other stuff. Like we wrote a paper called Snacks to talk about that, and obviously DNS has had that proof of stake, and NEPA-PALs, the proof of work. I think those things are definitely going to bring those things into the conversation, and our hope is to find ways to integrate those into Lace as we start getting users from other ecosystems.
Project Catalyst has come a very long way. In Fund 2 and Fund 3, there was only hundreds of thousands of dollars going out to fund community projects. In the last fund, there was, over, I think it was $8 million, $9 million that were given out to many projects in Catalyst. And I'm curious, Catalyst is changing all of the time. Where is Catalyst going?
So Catalyst is an integral component in the growth hacking of Cardano, in that it gives the community the ability to set priorities and fund those priorities at the grant level to help bootstrap a vision. It's not really intended to replace VC. It's not really intended to be the sole source of funding, but rather an innovation fund to encourage and inspire people to start building in a particular direction. And we see this a lot with governments like the National Science Foundation. So it doesn't replace the whole notion of industrial research, but what it does do is incentivize people to start studying things that are viewed to be valuable to the American academic community. So in the case of Catalyst, the community decides, well, maybe we want more adoption in Africa, or maybe we want better developer experience, or maybe we want more scalability, or maybe we want more wallet diversity, or whatever that challenge problem is. And the point of Catalyst is to give a shot in the arm to a lot of people who are building that. Now, what's nice about it is it doesn't become like a government bureaucracy where it allows these zombie projects that aren't commercializable to survive long term. Rather, what it does is it gives enough resources to get the conversation started, but it's still incumbent upon the person receiving funding to find a viable model to continue pursuing it. So it has a place and a purpose like a grant agency. And what's cool about the Cardano Treasury is that's just one arm of the Cardano Treasury. The Age of Voltaire is about turning on all the tools of governance of Cardano, including diversity of treasury. So there's different treasury events like funding consortiums to do long arc development work for long arc roadmap. That's the next milestone for, I'd say, for our participation. But then there's also potentially infrastructure that we as an ecosystem decide needs to be funded long term, like the DB Syncs of the world or the exchange integrations and these things. And that's an example of where you could pay technical fellows full time to work on nothing but that. And that would be very different than Catalyst, because that's not about innovation. That's about maintenance, interoperability, and capabilities inside the ecosystem. So what was nice about Catalyst is it got people started in the conversation of governance, voting, the concepts of DREPs and these types of things. But we're starting to outgrow that model, as you see by the demands for changes in protocol parameters, whether it be K or minimum fees or these things. And we're starting to see a clamoring for different governance institutions and structures. So come November, we in the foundation are outlining a pretty aggressive plan to try to create structures that allow as many people as possible to participate through a members-based organization, on-chain voting, and also bringing the concept of DREPs into Cardano's core so that a governance class can form that goes above and beyond anything we imagine with Catalyst. Now, Catalyst will still be around and it has a place and purpose, but it can then become much more focused on being that grant agency model to help projects get bootstrapped and incentivize directionality inside Cardano's agenda. but it then needs to be augmented by other funding streams from the Cardano treasury to accommodate other demands, whether they be maintenance or innovation.
So with that proposal, currently users can use their ADA with the Project Catalyst app to vote on the projects that they like to see succeed. Moving past that proposal, if it does succeed, is a user going to, delegate their ADA and have that representative vote on projects for them? Or will users still be able to vote on proposals and eventually, protocol parameter changes in the future?
Yeah, I'd like users to be able to vote on proposals still. And actually, I'd like to extend that to any Cardano native asset. And there's been a lot of discussion of, can we take the Jormungandr chain, retire it, not have it as a side chain, but rather have it as a Mithril Hydra application. So combine those two things together and actually use the upcoming Hydra Tail protocol to basically do vote batching. And then allow voting modules to be plugged in for different governance systems and so forth. DREPs are kind of a different concept of delegative democracy, so liquid feedback. And the basic idea there is that we have 5 types of governance events that could occur. You have a protocol parameter update, you have a movement of treasury funds, that's an MIR movement, you have a hard fork event, and then you also have kind of some meta events, like if we had a constitution, you'd have to have some ability to amend and change that constitution. So kind of the high level rules of the system that go above and beyond a protocol parameter, like the monetary policy or how some of the governance things work. And then obviously you'd need some mechanism to fire people, so votes of no confidence or these types of things. So we've thought a lot around those governance events, and through a SIP-driven process, what we're going to do in November is roll out a bunch of SIPs that cover each of those categories and kind of proposes a tricameral model that we think is going to have a lot of good impact and people can debate. Now, it's an entry point, meaning it's not a canon. It's basically an idea then for the community to spend 2023 debating and cogitating, and then we can have some focused, scoped workshops and bring people together, get it through the SIP process, and then go and implement those things. Voltaire cannot be implemented unilaterally. You can't go like Moses from the mountaintop, come down with 10 commandments and say, God has said this. This is really a system for the people, by the people, and it really does need that validation. So everything from a constitution for Cardano would need to be validated by the ADA holders to a governance system. And it needs to have enough flexibility that people can come and go. And if people aren't producing value to the ecosystem, they can be fired. And if people are, that merit is recognized and they get elevated in that respect. So we've thought about this for years, and we built a lot of the base infrastructure, and Catalyst gave us a view on everything from voter experience to voter applications to level of participation to the types of things that people tend to be good at making decisions on, the types of things that they really have difficulty making decisions on. And I think we've now converged to a point where we're ready as an ecosystem to go full on and build a proper blockchain government system. And if we do that and get it right, I think we'll actually be the strongest cryptocurrency in the world from that perspective.
Yeah, I completely agree. I was actually speaking with Frederick Ergaard, the CEO of the Cardano Foundation last week, and we spoke a lot about parameter changes and where we are and where we're going. And he didn't state this explicitly, but it seemed that the Cardano Foundation has really taken on the role of thinking about the future parameter changes of K and A naught. Whereas previously, it was IOG's technical team, obviously with, community response. So I'm curious if that is, the direction of future parameter changes of, parameters like K and A naught. Is that the Cardano Foundation's role moving forward to think about those parameters?
I think the community, in consultation with expert groups together, are going to have to figure that out. And I think that should be done by an on-chain democratic process instead of a council of elders who decide from above. IOG, what we've always done is said, look, our goal is to get to stability. It's not necessarily fairness. It's not necessarily the most optimal. It's a relative maxima that we can live with to allow the system to be stable. And then I don't think small stake pool operators are fully aware that some of the things that you'd like to solve with the augmentations of K potentially could be resolved by implementation of technology like Conclave for federated pools, so you can batch together and get rid of the multi-pool operators and instead just have networks of federated pools, and also partial delegation, where you delegate to a portfolio instead of an individual pool, because most people, they just have single wallets. So those two innovations alone, I think, actually solve a lot of the variance problems that we have, and it will mean that the pie gets split up a little bit more and revenue improves. But the other thing is that you have to understand that it's not a static system. And when you look at input endorsers, for example, the way we're designing it, it probably will result in a system that could tolerate tens of thousands of stake pool operators. And there's real parallel benefit to having them in the system, which means the entire reward model has to be rethought a little bit to accommodate that. The other thing is the reward model likely will have to be reevaluated from the perspective of having delegative democracy on chain, because you probably want to compensate the DREPs in that respect. And also, you're going to have more revenue streams as a stake pool operator with the existence of side chains. If somebody launches a side chain, the way we want to build them, the tokenomics of those chains are the rewards that are paid. They're paid to ADA holders. So instead of just getting an ADA return, you also get the network of side chains that are there. So the economics of a stake pool operator are going to change very rapidly. And it's important that people are aware of those roadmap considerations and they take that into a factor. So what we did is we said, let's get the system to a stable state and let's get a government launched. And once the government's launched, give people the tools and transparency that they need to start having real great conversations. Now, some of those are done through the SIP process, like SIP 50. And I forget the SIP for the Curb Benefit Pledge. That was another SIP that was community driven. And then some of those are done through papers and some of those are done through committees. I believe the best place for this to be discussed is a members-based organization. So basically form an organization. Everybody's free to join it. There's committees on that organization. It's merit-based. You do work, you get status. And then basically through that process, people can discuss a lot of these things and then ultimately let the community decide through some sort of voting process how to allocate and tune things, whether it be minimum fees or K or other of the system parameters. And if they really don't like something, give them the ability to hard fork as well. Now, the role of the foundation then can be an organization that has some objectivity and neutrality, and they can score things, almost like a government accountability office or an auditor like the Congressional Budget Office or these types of things. And they can basically come in and say, well, if you go with X, here are the consequences. If you go with Y, here are the consequences. And they have objectivity because they don't commercially benefit one way or the other in that respect. Having them unilaterally decide, the problem there is that they're going to have to build a brain trust and B, legitimacy. And the issue is it's not a members-based organization. The council is unelected, and unless they make structural changes to the Stiftung, they will not have community participation. And it's not clear how that would be done in the current model that they have. So substance follows form, and so you need a members-based organization that is dynamic, community-driven, and has elections in order for it to have legitimacy with something as serious and significant as the system parameters, the treasury system, hard forks, the roadmap of Cardano, and so forth. But that doesn't mean you get rid of expert organizations. IO is still around. The foundation's still around. You need a brain trust of engineers and scientists. That's what we do really well. Mm-hmm. And you need a brain trust of objective parties that are not beholden to financial interests and so forth, and they work for the community, and that's what the foundation does very well. And I think those augmenting the decision-making process will help that process along and get it where it needs to go. If you're curious about some reading, there's a great book called Demopolis, which kind of covers this and talks about this idea of direct democracy augmented by institutional support as an idealized form of government. And I think we're converging to that in the age of Voltaire, and I hope that survives the SIP process and we get that done in 2023.
Yeah, so the Cardano Foundation's role has been evolving. They're actually hiring a technical team. And I'm curious, from your perspective, what is the Cardano Foundation's role with the Cardano community and also the protocol itself?
It's not, if it was my decision what for them to do, I'd do things differently. But the point of checks and balances and separations of powers is it's not my decision. I don't have that role. And it's not my job to tell the Cardano Foundation what to do or what not to do. It's my job just to say, what does the ecosystem need, in my view, as an independent participant like you are. And every day on your show, you tell people what you think, and every day I tell people what to think on my MA, but our voices are equal in that respect. So I would like for the foundation, for example, to be very involved in funding community events. I would like for the foundation, for example, to be very involved in funding standards research. I'd like for them to be very involved in lobbying for pro-crypto legislation. I'd like for them to be very involved in intervening where there's clear criminality or agency failures in the ecosystem that harm every single ADA holder. Now, these roles would require technical acumen and scientific acumen because, by definition, they have to understand the technology to have an opinion on what's harmful to it. So it's great that they're staffing up. It's a little harder to justify saying, well, why don't we make them a software company? And because then they're picking winners and losers and they're creating canonical technology outside of the concept of creating a technical fellows program and specifications in these things. Like, for example, we do need wallet certifications, and they would be a natural body to be a standards body for that. So then Lace can get certified and Flint can get certified, and other wallets like Nami and Eternal and so forth could get certified. And that's just better for everybody in that respect. But it's not my place or role to tell them that. We don't have a board seat. We're not probably going to get one. There's no mechanism for us to get elected to one. The community has no voice or say in the governance of the Cardano Foundation. This is not criticism. These are just facts of structure, and we can either complain about it or we can accept it as it is and say, well, what value can they produce given the structure and form that they have? And what other organizations do we need to construct to augment and enhance the existing incumbents that we have? So I try to stay in my lane in that respect. And I worry a lot these days about sustainability, technology, legacy. And I worry a lot these days about making foundational elements are present in our technology so that we can harness the power of the community. I have failed if IO is necessary for Cardano to work. I don't believe it is at this juncture, and for a long time it hasn't been. We just add value. And so every day I wake up and I say, are the things we do making the ecosystem more decentralized or less? Every day I wake up, are the things we do growing leaders and giving them the power they need to do things or less? Even the C Fund, where we started investing in things, what that did is it gave resources to dozens of dApps and gave them the ability to exist. I don't own enough of any of those to be able to influence their roadmaps. I just kind of gave them some of the resources they needed to skirt along, and now they're building things like Wing Riders is and Sunday is and so
forth. A lot of them are here.
Exactly. And I didn't make the decision for them to be here. I didn't call them up and say, oh, you got to come to Rare Bloom or anything. No.
Yeah, that was me.
Yeah, that was your job, And so I just showed up and they just showed up, and it's better for the community because of that.
Do you think that the Cardano Foundation, you mentioned that, if Cardano relies on IOG, that's a bad thing. Does Cardano rely on the Cardano Foundation for its success?
No, because there's been multiple scandals there throughout its life cycle, and had it relied upon them, we'd already be dead. I think the greatest sign of decentralization was the whole Michael Parsons affair and so forth, because what it did is it showed that Cardano didn't need its foundation any more so than Bitcoin needed its foundation. You have to think about these things in a positive, constructive way instead of a destructive way. A destructive way is saying, well, if they're not here, would we all die? A constructive way is saying their presence makes it more valuable. It makes the system better. It gives you new capabilities and new relationships. What they do best, I think, is acting as an objective, neutral party that has the ability to go talk to other blockchain ecosystems, regulators, exchanges, banks, have them go and talk to Fortune 500 companies, have them go and talk to standards bodies, these types of things, and represent as a voice some objectivity and credibility about what Cardano is and what Cardano isn't. The minute that they get involved in the governance of the day-to-day affairs of the protocol, the parameters of the protocol, then they've gone into a body that is adding value to everybody, to a body that's picking winners and losers. It's a very different role, and certainly it's a necessary one. But for that role to be legitimate, you need a democratic mandate. In the absence of it, it creates a lot of problems very quickly. There are plenty of people, despite the fact that I'm the founder of Cardano and I've done a lot for this ecosystem, that aren't very happy with me having a lot of influence and would rather other people have that. And they've been very vocal on Twitter and Reddit and other places about it. And in some cases, they've left the ecosystem because they think that I'm a bad actor. And that's a good thing, because at the end of the rainbow, even though I'm the founder, I didn't win an election. I don't hold a democratic mandate. I need to get out of the way in that respect. And that's the point of the age of Voltaire, is to ensure that we have checks and balances and good governance structures, and everybody who's at the table is there because either the community decided explicitly for them to be there, or that they serve an objective, neutral role where they're enhancing value. Now, that said, officials at all of our organizations could run for office. and probably should. And what that would do is give them political mandates to go and pursue things where they have the power to actually make decisions that have positive and negative consequences on particular ventures inside our ecosystem. Just like the president of the United States, just like a senator, just like a congressman has a voice and power, and the exercising of that voice on power on behalf of others picks winners and losers in that respect. If you're a senator, at the end of the day, you got to decide with a regulation who to help and who to hurt. And if you're the president, you got to decide who to go to war with in this respect. Do we bomb this person? Do we don't do this, and so forth? Who are they to make that decision? Well, they are the ones we chose. We gave them that power in that respect. They didn't just show up and, go through the White House gates and say, okay, I guess I'm president now. We have a term for that. It's called a dictatorship. It's called a coup. It's what totalitarians do. So if we are to learn from what humanity has gained over the last 2 centuries, it's very important that we build something that is inclusive and democratic at its core. And that's one of the key differentiators between Ethereum and Bitcoin and Cardano. We're very explicit as an ecosystem, and we're moving in that direction, whereas they're implicit, and they seem to be more than comfortable having these unelected power domains that have perpetual influence for long arcs of time over their ecosystem. And the ownership of those ecosystems, namely holding Ether and Bitcoin, gives you no say in any of that. Whereas the holding of ADA does give you a say. Just like being a citizen of China gives you no say over Xi, whereas being a citizen of the United States gives you some say over your senator, congressman, and the president.
Well, thank you for clearing that for me. As this ecosystem evolves, I'm trying to.
By the way, that's
learn.
one man's opinion.
Yeah, of course.
Anyway, sorry.
No worries. As the ecosystem evolves, I'm really trying to see how the roles of these entities evolve, especially as more, come up, moving forward. So a little bit more lighthearted, what is Crypto Bison? And do you have any more updates for us on Crypto Bison?
So I was at CNFTCon and, Cardano NFTCon. And what was great about that experience is we got to see how big the NFT community Cardano has become. Over 140 exhibitors, 3,000 people registered. And
wow.
A lot of them were just so excited about this idea of unification. So they're tribes, and they're friendly tribes, but they have their own thing. So Ape Society is wildly different than Clay Nation, wildly different than any of the others inside the NFT space. And that's a good thing. So what we wanted to do was create a project that would kind of be a connecting tissue to bring a lot of people together and create some standards and also talk around some cool new concepts. Like, for example, we'd love this idea of a progressive NFT where the use of the NFT in something like a game levels it up, grows the NFT, and all the things you've done kind of stick with it. So you kind of think of like you play Diablo and your character gets to level 99 and you have all this cool gear. That's obviously very different than a level 1 character, and it reflects the experiences you've had, the time you've had, and so forth. So if you have gameplay mechanics where an NFT can carry that, and then that can be portable, meaning you take your character and move it into a metaverse like Cornucopias or Cardano Warriors or something like that, and that actually can be reflected and people in an open ecosystem can build around it, then you start talking about NFTs that live in multiple communities, multiple ecosystems, and it gives incentives for people to share and trade with each other for mutual benefit. Second, we were very keen to build an experience where you could explicitly bind intellectual property to an NFT. So with Crypto Bison, you make music. You buy an NFT to have a bison to make music with that bison. Well, as you make the music, that music is intellectual property that you should own. So what we do is we bind that to an NFT. So now you have a legal concept, a wrapper on how to bind IP to an NFT, which is a big thing that every musician we talk to cares about. It's a big thing that artists care about in general, because it's not clear when you buy an NFT, what exactly are you buying? People say, I have this NFT and it's of this picture. Well, do I own the intellectual property of that picture? Or is it like a
not always?
Yeah. Usually not, right? Well, let's make it explicit and make it an open standard. And that becomes something everybody in the Cardano NFT space can use as an open standard in their own project. And it solves a lot of the legal uncertainty. The other thing is I really love the idea of PvP and doing PvP in a way where there's real sacrifice, real loss if you lose. So I was a fan of Diablo 2, and when you die in hardcore mode, you lose your character. Mm-hmm. It's gone. So wouldn't it be cool that if you're doing PvP, like a battle of the bands, the losing band loses the intellectual property of its music that
gets burned.
Or it goes to the other player.
Oh,
you see, so now it's like, this is like high stakes, man. Mm-hmm. It's like if you lose, you don't just lose, you lose your song. It's like Prince losing his stuff. He's like the artist formerly known as Prince. So it's really cool, fun concept to play around with, and it's being developed by a subsidiary called SeaWorld. They do a lot of the NFT stuff, and what they're right now doing is working with a lot of the NFT vendors in the space to say, how do we pull everybody together and talk about these standards, these metaverse plays, these progressive NFTs, the IP binding, and ultimately, how do we build a great PvP experience that makes sense for everybody? So it's been a project we've been working on for about a year, and hopefully SeaWorld will be able to get some stuff out soon. And my hope is that it just continues to help push along and evolve the NFT space in Cardano. Every time we do something, we don't just do something to make a product and make some money. We also think of it as a steward from the perspective of, will the existence of this thing make the entire industry better, or at very least Cardano better? Mm-hmm. So when you look at Crypto Bison, if it's successful, it's going to introduce a lot of new concepts that are very necessary concepts for the NFT space as a whole to better integrate into the legacy space, and for NFT merchants to be a bit more legitimate and a bit more lawful.
Yeah. So I'm curious on, your thoughts on, we're jumping back to Catalyst a little bit. Catalyst was always an experiment, from the beginning. What surprised you about Catalyst? To me, a governance system of a decentralized protocol is one of the most complicated problems to solve. So is there anything that happened with the way users acted, or, certain proposals that were funded that surprised you about Catalyst? And is there a solution for that?
Well, how quickly it grew was surprising. It went from almost nothing, because you were there in the early days and you saw it with the rest of us, to where it's at today, where there are thousands of things being discussed.
I was in the podcast wars.
Yeah, yeah, I remember that with the Cardano effect and the rest again.
You said
it feels like a lifetime ago, but it
really
wasn't.
Does.
It wasn't.
I missed that podcast so much.
I really do too. They should have gotten funded. So I was surprised they didn't get funded. I was always assuming that people who had visibility and popularity would do quite well in a voting system. And it turned out that despite the fact that things like the Cardano effect had a tremendous amount of visibility and popularity, they still weren't able to get what they wanted over the finish line. And that's a very important message, that if you put the right structures in place, it actually gives you outcomes that potentially are surprising. I'm a little disappointed we haven't got audit pairings figured out yet. So especially for larger scale projects, if people are going and doing things, it's important that when you fund the project, you also fund the acceptance criteria and oversight of the project at the same time. Mm-hmm. So let's say you're going to go build Paycoin or something like that, and it has supposed to have all these great properties. Well, who is going to tell the community you've done your job? You need some other party to do that. Usually a grant agency accesses that. The problem is that Cardano is brain dead. It's a a cryptocurrency. It doesn't have sentience. It's not an artificial intelligence. Maybe Ben will figure that out, but until Singularity gets to the next level, we're gonna have to live with the fact that these are stupid systems. So
he told me 2 years. So
yeah, he's been telling me that for a while too. And I said, well, if you don't get there, can I get your hat? So anyway, when you look at this stuff, you say, okay, well, you need to have somebody who has human judgment to act on behalf of the Cardano community to do those acceptance criteria. So audit pairing, I think, is real important, especially for high complexity stuff. But all things considered, given its age, the level of progress, the amount of community things that got funded that turned into commercial projects on Cardano, I think it's wildly successful as a growth hacking engine. And what's cool is that every time a mistake is made, the community is open about that mistake. They don't go and try to sweep it under the rug and say, well, we can't talk about it. It's actually quite the opposite. They like talking about it quite a bit. Even things that they have an opinion are a mistake. Like, I'm not taking a position on it, but Daedalus Turbo is an example of that, where at least some of the community feel that this was a unnecessary expenditure and way too much given what was being proposed, and the person proposing it didn't have the reputation necessary to do it. Mm-hmm. But whether that's true or not, you have to take a step back and say the fact that that conversation exists is a very healthy thing. So that self-correcting, that constant vigilance, that constant litigation of decisions that were made by the system is how a system improves itself. It's called CQI, continuous quality improvement. And so I'm very glad that Catalyst is exhibiting that. There's no central authority. It's no bureau of quality that wakes up every day and does that. It's actually a very bottom-up process in that respect.
And, well, and the design was always to fund a bunch of different projects
Yeah.
At the same time. And then with Pareto's principle, the 20%, or you're going to do value there. And, hopefully people hearing about dataless turbo is going to make them pay more attention and, actually look through these proposals. So yeah, it was definitely, in my opinion, a good mistake to make, but a little expensive of one.
Well, it's not necessarily a mistake either. The cool part about it is that the future is unwritten. And even if the initial proposal isn't where it needs to be, there's no reason the community can't come together and work with that proposal, massage it, and get it done. For example, our view on it, because it took me by surprise, was that, well, if you want to make Daedalus sync really quickly, then let's try to find a way to accelerate the integration of Mithril into Daedalus. Because the way Mithril is designed is it's going to make full nodes sync at the speed of their cores. So if you have 18 cores, you can do 18 epics in parallel. And so suddenly it's 18 times faster.
Yeah.
Wow, that's incredible. He said 10x. It could be a lot more. So that's great, but maybe there's a convergence of our roadmap and his roadmap, and we can see, or maybe there's another community idea to do this. But what's great is post-funding, that conversation's continuing, and then we could potentially turn something that could be bad to something that actually ends up succeeding beyond the expectations of the community. That's the cool part of Catalyst as the conversation starter, is that nothing is left finished. It's always just the next iteration and so forth. And I can entirely envision that these things can get in the right direction if they need to be.
I'm going to extend that question to the growth of this industry, and maybe with a focus on regulation. How is the growth of this industry and the future regulation that seems to be coming? Has that surprised you? And what can we do to not be regulated in a way that's harmful for our industry, especially in the United States? We have the infrastructure bill that was passed last year that states that state pool operators cannot perform swap transactions, and that's starting right in 2023. And there's really no way for us to account with that, without KYC. So,
yeah, bad regulation harms everybody, even the regulators who write it, because it gives them jobs they can't comply with, and it just harms competitiveness. We certainly have had a strong opinion about where things need to go, and we've shared that opinion with many lawmakers and regulators, and we go to Washington now on a regular basis. I'm starting to learn what the inside of the Capitol looks like, and I've gone from like seeing it in pictures to actually knowing what the offices of certain senators look like.
You were there last week, right?
Yeah, I was there actually just a few days ago, and then while there, we engaged and met several congressmen and several regulators, and they're productive conversations. They're tiring because there's a lot of work to do. There's a lot to say, and it's a slow, methodical process, but they're productive and positive from the perspective that everybody does want to do their job. And we have to, as an industry, admit that some things we've done are not so good. Luna existed, BitConnect existed. The government has to admit that we've done a pretty good job, all things considered, going from nothing to $1 trillion industry in 13 years. And if this is to continue being an American industry where more than half of the ventures and jobs are in the United States, the United States has to adopt a regulatory framework that is sensible for everybody. They forget that when they say, oh, well, staking could be a security, or staking could be this, or you have this compliance requirement, those are small businesses at the end of the day, thousands and thousands of small businesses that if you plan it right and you let them grow, they can be big businesses that employ hundreds of people each. I don't think we want to live in a country that goes and destroys 500,000 jobs or 1 million jobs because of a flick of a pen, not understanding the regulatory realities of things. Nobody wants to do that. So it's important that we have wisdom in the process, and wisdom comes from conversation and empathy and information and from engagement. And we're doing our part, others are doing their part. And I'm very optimistic next year that something is going to get passed in legislation that hopefully will improve the state of affairs for the industry. And then with that, we can start getting to the business of actually getting to the next level as an industry, getting to the 1 billion users.
So what would you say for advice for, United States stake pool operators that cannot, classify themselves as brokers and follow these regulations starting January 1st in 2023?
Well, this is the fucked up part about how this process is working, whereas they pass the infrastructure bill and then the regulators just say, well, we probably won't enforce it. It's It's like immigration law. You know, you have a clear definition of it, and then you have agencies that say, well, we think it's morally wrong, so we're not going to force it. Or the IRS saying, well, we know you're cheating on your taxes, but we're just not going to audit you, or something like that. Don't worry about it. In fact, they actually have an internal notion at the IRS about how much tax fraud is okay. You know, so if it's a few $100 billion a year, it's probably okay. If it gets over 500, we really need to dial up the audits a little bit. It's like, it's so messed up that it's like, why don't you just change the law so everybody's not a criminal, instead of just allowing like pseudo criminality to exist inside the environment. So I feel your pain, and I was one of the first to get really fucking pissed off when the infrastructure bill came through. And I saw Senator Toomey up there and others basically having a certain senator from Alabama, who shall remain nameless because he didn't get his military pork, basically undo a very necessary amendment which had bipartisan support. Would have passed in an ordinary Senate. It was a 70-30 vote. You know, it's a very frustrating situation. So as a protocol architect, what I can do is at least try to give you guys a glass of ice water in hell. And what that means is that we can introduce concepts like contingent staking. So when somebody stakes to you, it's a multi-sig instead of a push transaction. So to accept the delegation, you have to sign it as well as a stake pool operator. So that means you would sign it only if it had an identity payload. So you now have a KYC, or acknowledgement that they're not a U.S. citizen. Because what's going to end up happening is you have to have segregated delegation. If you read the letter of the law, you have to segregate your U.S. delegations from international delegations. International, you have no reporting requirement at the moment. U.S., you may have a reporting requirement. So at the very least, you need to know who's under U.S. jurisdiction and who's not under U.S. jurisdiction. The interaction of Atala Prism and contingent staking could make that an automated process and not destroy you guys. But it's really unfortunate that this Congress decided, for whatever reason, to introduce a system that did this to an entire industry for no particular policy consideration. It's not going to increase tax compliance. It's not going to, help anybody. All it does is just burdens people to comply with an unfunded mandate that actually doesn't solve any real problems. And I think we're going to get it fixed in the next piece of legislation. It's certainly a correction for it is in the Financial Innovation Act. I think some of the other acts also have corrections for it, but it's just a mess right now.
Yeah. And, even if you can limit delegations, the issue still is, though, you can't determine what transactions you process. If 1% of the network delegates to you, you're going to process 1% of the transactions, and you can't determine whether there's a swap in those transactions. So no matter what,
transaction discrimination is starting to happen on the Ethereum side. More than half the blocks are now OFAC compliant. So if transactions are coming from jurisdictions they believe are in violation, like Russia, Iran, North Korea, I guess they can censor them now. In fact, I just tweeted something from Martin, who's a big guy in the Ethereum space, created Gnosis, and he was just lamenting over the fact that censorship-resistant Ethereum, they have to kind of just get rid of the resistant thing now, censorship Ethereum. So yeah, you certainly could do transactional discrimination in an SPO. You're not a financial institution, so it's fucking nuts. It would be like saying to a power company, hey, those electrons that are going to the pot grower versus the electrons that are going to the bank versus the electrons that are going to the hospital, you now have to know the differences there. You have to understand the kilowatts that you're selling, where they're going. And if you sell them to the wrong person, we're going to hold you guys liable. I'm sorry, Excel is not responsible for trying to figure out who's growing pot.
Yeah.
It's just nuts.
Yeah, you need some pattern recognition software.
Yeah. So SBOs can't possibly become the banker, the regulator, file a suspicious activity report or any of these types of things. You're just going to have to figure it out through another means. And it's insulting to think that they have that burden of reliability. They're not banks. They're not RAs. They're not registered financial intermediaries. It's nuts to put that on them. They're transaction processors in that respect, and they should not be treated any differently than the power company in that respect.
Yeah. Well, I know you got to meet with Champ next up, so I wanted to say thank you for coming to the event and supporting the event. You're doing multiple podcasts, you're doing this one right now, and multiple keynotes. So thank you so much. And thank you all to everyone that watched this. If you guys enjoyed it, make sure you comment Charles down below to let us know you made it till the end. And I hope you have a good rest of your time here.
Thank you so much. Cheers.
Cheers.